Taking a closer look then at the VRS DirectForce Pro Wheel Base controller box. If we look at the rear panel, on the left we have two D-sub connectors. We have the motor power output first, then the encoder input, the e-stop. So if this is not connected, then you will lose force feedback power. The USB socket, a reset button, and an AC input, standard kettle style. So before attaching anything to the controller box, make sure the power switch is set to off like this. We'll set that down. Take your power for the motor cable and do pay attention to the shape of the D-sub profile. So one side is longer than the other. It is possible, I believe, to accidentally plug this in the wrong way, but it requires a great deal of force to do that. So just pay attention to this carefully to make sure that it goes in the correct way around. Now, it's not possible with the encoder because there's more pins on one side, but still pay attention. You shouldn't have to apply too much force. So what we'll do is we'll put in the motor plug first, before then hand tightening the screws, followed by the encoder plug, then the USB plug, and finally the power port. Now, avoid the urge to turn the power on at this stage, since we do not have the motor plugs connected. Connecting up the motor plugs then, first off start with the encoder plug. Now pay attention to the position of the largest keyway, basically the groove here, and line it up correctly with the one on the socket, which in this case is this orientation. Now it should not require much force on the coupling nut to tighten the plug. Of course at the end it will be firm, but if it's overly tight something is wrong. Next we'll go to the power plug, which is above. Again, pay attention to the biggest keyway, which is actually here, and match up with the socket. And again, same thing, line it up correctly, and it shouldn't require too much force on the coupling nut. Now of course, remember you have free choice in how you mount your motor, so you can have the plugs either coming out of the top or the side, or at the bottom or of this side, so you've got freedom in that regard. Another thing you can do is to actually alter the angle of the back shell of the plug, and therefore the cable exit direction. So in order to do that, first you must loosen off the cable gland, and this will allow the cable freedom to not be strained inside the plug. Then, instead of undoing the coupling nut, there's another lock nut just above that, so loosen that off, and then that will allow you to rotate the entire back shell. So get it to the desired angle, retighten, and then retighten the cable gland. Now moving on to the motor shaft, if there is a key along this keyway still in place, make sure you do remove that. And it's also likely that the shaft is covered in grease, so do make sure that you thoroughly clean, ideally with some alcohol as well, to make sure the shaft is completely clean of any grease. And also take your motor hub adapter and also make sure that the hole is also free of any grease. Now, making sure that you have a 5mm Allen key to hand. Take your motor hub, make sure that the screws are loosely in place, make sure that there is nothing attached to the motor hub before you attempt to clamp these screws on the shaft. That is very important, that you make sure the hub is completely isolated on its own. Then gently slide it in position and tighten up the screws. Now your best approach is to loosely or gently tighten both screws and then gradually, bit by bit, tighten each one. So just work your way between both, because you want to ensure that each screw is applying an equal amount of pressure. So it may take a bit of time before you get your first grip, but when you do, like I just have now, then make sure again, just a few degrees each time, and you should feel a similar level of resistance between, so it's getting a bit harder now, between each screw. So you should need to apply a decent amount of force at the end, but of course you don't want to damage the screws or strip any thread. So that should be sufficient. Now, although you can directly mount a steering wheel rim to the hub here, it's highly recommended that you do use a quick release such as this one here. We've also got several spacers just to bring the wheel a little bit further away from the motor, more towards the driver. And in terms of angle or orientation of the hub or the quick release, it really does not matter. The rotation can be anything. So just gently present the screws to the holes and gradually going from opposite ends, work the screws in place. Don't go any further than just a pinch tight. And then once you've got all the screws in to the end but not yet tightened, just wiggle everything around so it's nice and centered, and then start to tighten the screws. So again, go from opposite end to opposite end. And then one final time, just work your way around, ensuring that every screw is tightened up fully. We're now ready to attach our steering wheel rim. When you first power up the controller box, you will notice that the wheel goes through a phasing period. This is normal, just let the motor do its thing. Once it stops turning, you're ready to calibrate and go racing.